Hello and welcome to this Hayes Parsons webinar in respect of travel insurance, and thank you for sparing 20 minutes or so to join us. So, to begin with, my name is Ben Lear. I look after the education side of Hayes Parsons Insurance Brokers, and I'm also one of the directors here. And I'm assisted on this particular webinar by my colleague Mark Rose, who is an account executive, and he will be undertaking the actual webinar content. We have a good mixture of schools on the call this morning, being a combination of existing Hayes Parsons clients, but also schools who are represented elsewhere. And you are all most welcome, and thank you again. For those schools who have already provided questions, we will cover these off in part during the presentation and more specifically in the Q&A at the end. Should anybody wish to ask a question as we go through, then please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and we will receive these and we'll put them with the others at the end of the webinar. These will be anonymous, so feel free to write whatever you please. So travel, where are we now? This is the first of our Education COVID-19 Insight webinars, and we intend to undertake these weekly for a small period of time insofar as demand is there and we can provide relevant content. The next topic, just so as you are aware, which will be a week today, which is the 4th of June, is on the reopening of schools, both imminently, but also covering the next couple of months with regards to what activities and provisions could reasonably be expected and where insurance might fit into this. Before I pass to Mark, I think it's fair to say that we all know much more about package travel regulations than we ever dreamed we would. Perhaps some of the travel sector should have joined us today, as I think some need a little re-educating themselves. APTA never returned my call, unfortunately, to try and join us. But on that note, Mark, it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. This is the agenda I'm going to be running through today. Now, to make sure I preserve bandwidth, I'm just going to go down to my picture rather than on there. So hopefully everyone can still see that. So what I'm going to run through is where we are now in the UK and how that is different from elsewhere in Europe. We'll talk about ABTA and ATOL and the package travel regulations. I'll talk through the mechanisms for refunds being offered by travel companies and your rights under their terms and conditions and the package travel regulations. And then I'll run through the insurance cover to explain when and what you can claim for. We'll then take a look at the crystal ball and see how what is happening now is going to impact you in the future in respect to school trips and what considerations we feel you need to take into account for future trips that you arrange. And then finally, we'll have a question and answer session. So the current situation, on the 12th of March 2020, the government advised schools and colleges against all overseas trips for children under 18 until further notice. This was soon followed by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advising British nationals against all non-essential international travel for an initial period of 30 days from the 17th of March. Then the Department of Education advising against domestic trips, both residential and non-residential, for children under 18 that were organised by schools and colleges. In effect, we have a current situation where you can't travel, and whilst things will change over the following weeks and months, with countries around the world now beginning to ease themselves out of lockdown, with the high number of daily infections currently in the UK, it may still be a while before UK nationals are allowed into other countries. At the moment, trip providers are having to cancel trips. There should be, within their terms and conditions, a clause relating to them being unable to fulfil the trip. Package trips lasting more than 24 hours or including an overnight stay will likely fall under the package travel and linked travel arrangement regulations of 2018. If the trip provider's terms and conditions don't fall in line with the regulations state that they are implied contractual terms in all package trips, and therefore the legislation overrides the terms and conditions. A package trip is generally the combination of 2 or more different types of travel services which are combined for the purposes of the same trip, such as flights, coaches, accommodation and activities. However, there are instances such as residential activity holidays that may not fall under the regulations, as the accommodation is an intrinsic part of the activity week. Whilst in normal circumstances, the regulations state a refund should be paid within 14 days, these are obviously extraordinary circumstances at the moment, and schools need to take this into account. So schools should expect a significant delay in receiving a refund. In the UK, the government have not changed the package travel regulations to allow for the current extraordinary circumstances. Now, this actually differs from many other European countries who all have equivalent legislation in place, as the regulations we have follow the European Package Travel Directive 2015. So many other countries, including France, Italy, Belgium, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands and Denmark, have taken action to amend their laws on a temporary basis to allow for these delayed refunds. With the lack of government response to ABTA's calls for amendments to the regulations, they have instead introduced a refund credit note in line with the European Commission official recommendation. So there are at the moment 3 different forms of refund being given. There's a cash refund. This is your right under the regulations, and we recommend that schools push for this. You get a refund credit note, but these are being offered as the travel companies at the moment simply don't have the funds for wholesale cash refunds to everyone. Accepting these allows schools to show some forbearance and understanding of the situation that the travel industry finds itself in. ABTA, though, has made it clear to its members that even when offered and accepted temporarily, if schools request settlement by cash refund as soon as possible, then those companies should refund as soon as possible. The benefit of accepting these, the refund credit notes, is that you remain financially protected for the period of the refund credit note. However, there has been some recent confusion around this because the UK government and the Civil Aviation Authority in particular have not come out publicly to reconfirm its position on the issue since the start of the crisis. This is despite the Air Travel Trust Fund payment policy stating deferred refunds remain financially protected, which the package holiday advice on the CAA website also refers to. Now, refund credit notes may look different depending on your travel provider, but they should all comprise of these following items: an expiry date, which is a date to which your money is protected. You're entitled to rebook or have a cash refund by this date at the latest, if your original booking, that was for a package holiday. Now, the value of the refund credit note must be equal in value to the amount that you paid for the original booking, or less any amount that you have been given as a part refund. The refund credit note must also include the original booking details and reference. Now, finally, some companies we've seen are offering vouchers. Holiday vouchers are not the same as a refund credit note and don't come with any financial protection of ATOL or ABTA. The same applies to gift vouchers and other discount vouchers being offered. So do not accept vouchers, because should that company fail, you will have no protection. So then moving on to travel insurance, when should it apply? Travel insurance generally applies when certain individuals are unable to travel due to injury or illness or the death of a close family member. Until recently, it's been rare for whole trips to be cancelled. So how does the insurance actually apply? Well, travel insurance provides cover for irrecoverable costs in the event of a cancellation of a trip, where that cancellation is outside of the control of the school. Any trips that are due to run during the lockdown period obviously cannot take place, and therefore this is outside of the school's control. So what costs are irrecoverable? If you've not booked a package holiday and therefore no refund under the terms of the regulation, and the travel company's terms and conditions do not allow for a refund in the event that they're unable to fulfill that contract, then those costs are irrecoverable. If deposits are retained by providers, those costs are irrecoverable. So when exactly do costs become irrecoverable? Well, for any valid cancellation claim, insurers ask schools to look to recoveries from other parties to assess the potential financial losses before a claim is submitted. This could be in the form of any refunds that may be due as a result of contractual liabilities with third-party providers, or any refunds that may be due direct from any airlines should you have already cancelled, or should they have already cancelled scheduled flights related to the trip. In terms of mitigating losses, where airlines refuse to refund money, they do have to refund the tax even if you miss the flight. The last point I'll put there is third-party intransigence. At Hayes Parsons, we've seen a full spectrum of responses from travel companies, from those that are bending over backwards to try to help schools and give them a refund, to those that steadfastly refusing to do so, even though they have not provided a service. Indeed, the Competition and Markets Authority have made it clear that it will investigate companies who have failed to deliver a service yet still charge a full sum. Every situation basically is different and depends on the booking terms and conditions, and so we advise schools to seek advice. For those that are on this webinar that are not insured through Hayes Parsons, we are happy to assist you with this if you would like to make contact directly with us. You can get our full details on the Hayes Parsons website. So moving forwards, looking towards some future trips, insurers will consider COVID-19 or any variant of it as a known circumstance. And so trips that have been booked after the Foreign Office advice against all but essential travel would not have insurance cover. Indeed, we're now seeing COVID-19 total exclusions and pandemic exclusions coming through from insurers as policies are renewed. Those that we have seen apply across the whole policy, so cover is excluded under medical expenses as well as cancellation sections. Under most travel insurance policies, there is already an exclusion relating to cancellation as a result of regulations or order made by any public authority or government. This has not been imposed by most school travel insurers, as the reason for not travelling was the advice of government not to travel, so not a government order. However, some insurers have imposed this where the travel has been stopped as the country to which they were travelling had closed its borders. So when considering future trips, you need to take into account that whilst travel insurers have picked up a lot of claims at present down to the COVID-19 disease, insurance is unlikely to be a safety net for you in the future. One further point to mention is if you have a travel insurance renewal midway through this pandemic, you need to check your cover still provides cancellation for any future trips that were actually booked before this situation arose. So don't cancel the cover or accept a total exclusion without first checking that trips already booked prior to the current situation arising will continue to be covered. Now, premium expectations, I'm sure it won't come as a surprise that as to premiums, I think we will see significant increases in premiums over the next year. The initial ABI estimates suggest a record £275 million paid to customers in cancellation claims on travel insurance as a result of COVID-19. So what do you need to consider as a school? When planning future trips, there are a number of considerations that we think you need to take into account. First off is parental anxiety. Are parents going to be willing to send their children abroad, despite the obvious scholastic benefits of such? And then you have staff anxiety. Will you have sufficient staff willing to travel abroad? Now, this is a situation that has not previously been experienced and has caused a great deal of concern for everyone. We think it will probably take a year or two of normality before people start to trust in travelling again. The government are looking to impose a 14-day quarantine for travellers coming into the UK from next week. If other countries do the same, travel will be unlikely to happen until such restrictions are lifted. Then when will the Foreign and Commonwealth Office change their advice? This is simply an unknown quantity, and even if they do change their advice, will the Department for Education follow suit, or will they maintain the advice against all travel for under 18s? Social distancing measures also look to be with us for some time now, so can the popular residential courses in the UK still be feasibly carried on? Should the FCO advice change and the DFE advice change, do you need to be more wary of the destinations that you're intending to travel to, particularly bearing in mind the duty of care that you have? Now, these are all questions that we don't have answers to, but questions that you and your governors need to consider prior to making future travel arrangements. Now, before I stop, I'll just remind you of the Hayes Parsons COVID-19 Resource Hub that's available on our website. So I'll now hand back to Ben.
Thank you, Mark. Taking the premium comment a little further, I think it's fair to say that the premiums that schools pay for the cover that they get is disproportionately cheap. If you think for each insured person, whether it be a pupil or a member of staff, can go anywhere in the world at present, and depending on the policy, including winter sports cover. For multi-trips, which are unspecified, you're paying about £2 or £3 per head. Now, what the current situation has manifested itself in is, I think insurers have suddenly realised the exposure that they have on their travel insurance schemes with schools and colleges, depending on which broker they work with. It's come to light. I'm sure it's recognised in schools anyway. But if you tot up all of the trips that schools do throughout the year and the value of trips, they can be well into six figures in respect of the overall value of them. And if you multiply that by the number of schools there are in the country, and then you put £2 or £3 against it per head, you can see that I think the actuaries within the travel insurance industry will be crunching some numbers quite hard. That said, this is an unprecedented phenomena. It is not against individual schools because it is completely out of your control. So although the premiums should shift and probably will shift, to what extent we don't know, but in the grand scheme of things against your overall premium spend, I don't think it's going to make a massive dent. In respect of should you make a claim, wary of potential impact on future premiums, I would suggest you explore this conversation with your current broker and possibly would suggest that you do put in the claim, because I don't think you're going to be penalised by doing so. Any premium increases that come through, I think, are going to happen regardless, just because of what's happening within the industry. So you might as well put the claim in. I don't think it's going to disproportionately impact the school's claims experience. One other consideration, and again, this has come to light as a result of the current pandemic, is the maximum sum insured per trip on any current policy. If no costs were recoverable, and some schools could be close to or could even breach the upper end of the policy limit, they could be 50,000, they could be 100,000 per trip, but I would check with your current policy and your current insurance provider to see whether you are inadvertently, potentially taking on liability for trips in their entirety, which might breach this upper policy limit. Now, we do have some questions, so I'm going to ask them a bit of a Q&A for Mark to answer them. And the first one is, despite the ongoing delays in getting responses or refunds from third parties, we have a few cases where individual pupils cancelled due to ill health, and we now need to put in the claim for the entire trip. Would the individual claims cause any issues with the overall claim, Mark?
Straightforward answer is no, they shouldn't cause any issues at all. A travel policy that's arranged on a group basis indemnifies the group and indemnifies the individual. So those individual claims should go through naturally individually, and then you can do a full claim for the full loss of trip as a completely separate claim under that same policy.
Okay, that's quite straightforward. Another one. If we had to cancel a trip to another country, how could we best protect ourselves to ensure we do not prejudice the policy cover?
That's a more difficult question, because what you're looking at there is, are you cancelling a trip? Because we don't know how long this situation is going to last for, where we're coming out of lockdown, but we don't know when you're going to be allowed to travel. If you cancel a trip that's in the future, let's say October, November time, but by that time you could have travelled, then insurers would likely consider that as disinclination to travel if you're cancelling it now, and that wouldn't be covered by a travel policy. So what our recommendation would generally be is that you continue with that trip as planned, but do make sure that if you have a renewal before you're due to travel, that is declared to insurers, and they accept the fact that that was a trip that was booked prior to the Foreign Commonwealth Office changing the advice for travelling.
Okay, thank you. Another one. We had a trip booked to France in May. The tour operator won't refund the cost, citing not their fault that we can't go. Therefore, they deem the school to have cancelled the trip. Yet they have offered us an alternative date or a credit note, but no cash refund. But what if we cannot go on the dates offered, or they go bust before the actual trip? Where and when could we claim?
Right. two main aspects there. They have offered a refund credit note, so therefore that is a cash equivalent at the moment, because so long as they're ABTA and ATOL protected, then you should still have that financial protection. Now, you can check that on the ABTA and ATOL websites to make sure that the provider is protected. What they haven't said there is whether they've booked it direct abroad or in the UK. I'm assuming UK booked, and so it would be under the package travel regulations. So as I said, you can, with that refund credit note, accept it temporarily, and then you are protected should they go under. But you should also ask for the money back, which is what you're really after. Now, if you were to immediately rebook for another date next year, again, we would need to declare that to insurers to say this is actually a continuation of a trip rather than a new trip. I'd also point out that if you accept a refund credit note and then use that refund credit note to book a new trip, that would be a new trip and you wouldn't be covered for the COVID-19 under the way insurers are changing their policies at the moment.
Okay. The next one is topical, pretty much as of last night, because they were in the media, this particular company, and were trying to defend themselves. It's the residentials, or the forthcoming residential, should I say, through PGL, which look like they are not going to go ahead. We've heard that they are not going to even open, yet they are saying that schools have cancelled and will not be issuing any refunds, but they are providing cancellation invoices for the school to put to the school's travel insurer. Is this correct? And what would the school insurer position be in this context?
Well, interestingly, I dealt with one of these this morning for one of our clients, and PGL have said they have cancelled, the school have cancelled, when that's quite frankly not the case. I checked on the website, their centres are all currently closed with no opening dates. They have furloughed staff. So the reason the trip is not going on is that they are closed as a result of government orders. So in my mind, the parts of the terms and conditions that are applying at the moment are that they are unable to fulfill the contract, which means that they have an obligation to refund 100% of the costs. Now, if they don't do that, we need to keep on pressing it. Because they have a legal obligation. I've read through their terms and conditions, and their terms and conditions are quite clear that if they can't fulfill the trip for any reason, clause 6 I think it was, then they should be given 100% refund.
Okay. At what point do you think you can only push so far and it deemed to be irrecoverable and then flips back to the school's travel provider?
If they remain steadfast on that basis, then I would suggest we put in a claim for under the travel insurance, because they are being so intransigent, and I don't want the schools getting caught in the crossfire. So that would be the intention.
Okay. We have a couple more. If we take the offer of rebooking the trip for within the next year, what insurance cover will be provided for this new trip?
Right. If you immediately take up a rebooking, that from the insurers that they deal with, they would regard that as a continuation of the current trip that has been cancelled. And so we're not actually cancelling it at the moment. If that goes on through to next year and is cancelled as a result of COVID-20 or whatever it may be next year, they will have continued on that cover, because we need to declare, so long as we've declared that trip to the insurers at renewal to say that this was the case, they will honour that through to next year. But if you accept a refund credit note and then use a refund credit note to purchase a new holiday at a later date, that would be a new trip and would exclude COVID-19 or pandemic cover.
Okay. And the final question. A trip was cancelled on the 17th of March after government guidance against all trips on the 12th of March, which we're familiar with. The trip was due to depart on the 23rd of March. Operators' terms and conditions say the school is liable for the full amount if the cancellation is within 28 days of departure. Credit voucher, but no refund credit note is offered. Is there an insurance claim?
The trip itself, if it falls under the package travel regulations, which it more than likely is, that would suggest that they are obliged, whether it says so in their terms and conditions, they would be obliged to give a refund on that. I would want to see the terms on all of these. They are all unique, and I really need to see the terms and conditions for each one before I can give sort of firm advice. But I'm happy, anyone who wants to approach me on those, I'm happy to give that firm advice on it. But my initial inclination is it sounds like if it was a trip abroad, then it would be down to the provider to refund because they were unable to provide that trip.
As a final thought from me, one of the schools that I work with cancelled the trip after Boris on the 12th said you can no longer go anywhere for educational trips. But the FCO guidance against all but essential travel didn't change until a few days later. And so the actual cancellation on that context was done by the school in the eyes of the third-party operator. And as a result, they don't deem them to have not fulfilled the contract, and they would not actually pay out under package travel regulations. We pushed them a couple of times and also threw in there the CMA authority in respect of the Combined Markets Authority, which is doing an investigation into how travel firms are operating their refunds at the moment. We're steadfast, to quote the word that was said earlier, but that did end up back with the travel insurer and was subsequently paid because it's not disinclination to travel. Although the school did cancel on that particular example, it was only after government guidance. So there is a couple of days between the 12th and the 17th of, or the 16th of March, I think it was, when the FCO changed their guidance, whereby you may get some kickback from the actual tour operators and say they're not contractually liable. If that's the case, your insurance should step up to the plate after a couple of pushbacks. If it's after the 16th of March and the package travel regs do apply to the contract, then they should expect to have the offers, whether it be cash or RCN. That brings our webinar to a close. If you want to discuss any aspect further, please do contact Mark or me, whether you're an existing Hayes Parsons client or indeed you are looked after anywhere else. We'll give you an impartial view. Thank you again for attending. Good luck with your one-way systems and making those additional signs stay up. Have a good day.